All right. Well, I think we were talking a little bit about server side
Google Tag
Google
Manager.
Tag Manager.
Yeah,
All
yeah.
right. So, because I don't know much about this, and you're more on the technical side, we're gonna run this more like an interview style.
All right, let's do it.
And I'm gonna ask questions that I think clients would actually ask.
Yeah.
And then you can respond so that they at least have a deep understanding of what
Mm-hmm.
we're doing. So, number one, what is it?
Well, let's talk about what Google Tag Manager is. Many of you out there already maybe know what this is, but the problem it was built to solve was essentially a lot of marketers and advertisers needed the ability to control a little bit of the marketing code on the website without having to necessarily involve developers. So traditionally you had to like copy and paste that code to put it on the website, and if you're a larger organization, you needed to get a developer involved to make sure the code was loading correctly on the page and everything like that. But that slowed down your ability to launch campaigns and to try to set up new funnels and things. So Google came out with this thing called Google Tag Manager, which allowed the developers to put some code on the page once in a little code container, and then marketers had a nice little interface that they could log into, and they could drop not even really code. I mean, you could put code, but you could drop data pieces that would fire marketing tags or event tags and things. So you could control that as a marketer and make adjustments as you needed without having to wait for a developer team with all of their different responsibilities and everything. So you could put that. So that's what it was there for.
Got it. So now, basically,
now we have a server-side version of that.
Okay. And what does server-side mean?
So server-side essentially means basically where the code is run and where where the ownership of the data kind of comes from. So traditionally, the Google Tag Manager server was Google's server, and it was owned by Google, and it was on a google.com domain. It was like googletagmanager.com domain. And all of the data that Tag Manager collected went to Google Tag Manager first, and then was forwarded on to whatever marketing tools you were using, whether it's your email marketing platform or whatever. With server side, a company now has the ability to create their own server. They could still host it with Google, but it would be a server on your own domain name. So it could be like tagmanager.blakebuse.com or like tagmanager.gregmarshall.co or whatever. And then the Tag Manager server software runs there. And then when you put the code container on your own website, it's not a googletagmanager.com domain name. It's your domain name. And the data flows from there to a server that you own and then out to your marketing platform.
Got it. And as far as like, why is that? I mean, I think I know the answer, but I think most clients would have this question. Why is that important?
So it all has to do with first-party and third-party data. Right. So there's all these things in America. It's starting to impact us more. In Europe, it's even bigger with their GDPR. They have different privacy rules and everything surrounding first-party and third-party data. So first-party data is essentially you're interacting with my website. You know you're interacting with my website, and I'm collecting data as the owner of that website and everything. So it's a lot clearer who owns that data and just your click and browsing data, and it's very clear to the user that Blake or Blake's business is probably collecting some data. Third-party data is much less transparent in that I could have all these tracking codes on my website and everything, and someone could come to my website, and then who knows? I could have a data broker that's selling their data off to a credit company or something like that, and they would have no idea that was happening. So that's third-party data, and we're getting more and more and more laws put in place and tech restrictions put in place to prevent third-party data from happening because there's these privacy concerns. And that was one of the big reasons, stated reasons with iOS 14 and now iOS 14.5 of making the changes they had, because they're like, we want to make sure that people are understanding and it's clear who's owning their data.
What they're using, why they're using it.
Right.
Got it.
Right.
So that's why this is important now from a business aspect. This is actually super beneficial because this can help you improve your understanding on return on investment.
Yeah, well, it helps in several ways. First, it improves your data collection process, right?
Okay.
So I don't know exactly how a lot of this is going to shake out, but as of right now, it's quite likely that if you set up Google Tag Manager server side under your own domain name,
Okay.
iOS 14 will likely not block a lot of that stuff, which they currently are. And the reason is that it's a technical reason. One of the ways iOS 14 blocks tracking data is they block it based on domain names.
Yeah.
So anything googletagmanager.com, just don't let that traffic go through. Well, if it's
these are workarounds.
If it's Greg Marshall, if it's tracking.gregmarshall.co, Apple doesn't have a block list for Greg Marshall. They probably don't even. I mean, they take your money, but the Apple execs don't know you, don't know right? They don't, and it may feel
and it would be harder for them to do this because you'd have to do this individually per domain, which would make this harder to block.
Absolutely, and it may. You said it's like a workaround, and in effect it is, but it really has to do with who's owning the data and the transparency of how that data is being used.
Do you think it's more? Some of my thoughts about the data and where it's going. Do you think it has a lot to do more with we may get you almost may get access to the data you used to have as long as it's first party, and the reason why they're doing that is because they want to just make sure they can hold organizations or people accountable for specific actions.
Yeah, I think so. I think there's a lot of accountability there. There's a lot of ownership there. I mean, back in the day, 10 years ago, 8 to 10 years ago, throw whatever on there, and that data was just getting collected all over the place. It's still getting collected a lot today.
Wild West.
I mean, it really is. I don't know if you watch John Oliver at all. Every now and again, I'll pick some of his. Do you know who he is?
I don't actually.
He runs a comedy show, but it's all political based, and he's a little bit left leaning.
Okay.
But he does tackle some interesting topics, and one of them he tackled was called data brokers. And it's something we haven't even talked about a whole lot on here, but there's this whole other layer behind the scenes of these huge companies that all they do through these ad networks, and I'm not talking Google ads or Facebook ads, I'm talking the ad networks on all the sites that you're not familiar with, that those are ads. They collect a ton of data about people, and then they just sell it to everybody, and it's it's anonymized. Right? They have a word for it or whatever, but the thing is, it's anonymized data, but it's this person was at this place and he stays the night there every night of the week, but we don't know who that person is. It's very easy to de-anonymize that for someone that, and that's an issue that a lot of companies are trying to solve, and some of these laws are trying to solve. So if I own the data, Blake Buse owns that data, I have zero desire to sell that data off to a data broker. It's not something I do or whatever. But if I had a blog or something and I was trying to expand my ad networks and I was using some ad network to drop some marketing code on there, I have no control over what types of data they're collecting.
Got it.
But if now with Google Tag Manager being server-side owned, I own all of that data that sits there in my own database, even though Google's providing the software, and then I get to choose who I'm sending that to, and it's a lot less wild west.
Got it. So, and what it sounds like is data is merging, or just there's an evolution of cleaning it up, making sure that it's taken care of. Just because maybe the value wasn't seen years ago. In the past, like they say, data is the most valuable thing now, right? And so because of that, you almost have to make sure there are some kind of regulations and things to keep things in order. Just because you don't want it to go crazy as far as how it can be used, and people just not knowing. But I just think overall organizing it is probably the better way to do it. And initially, I think there's maybe some pushback with, especially marketers, because you use this in the early stages. But I think long term, it's probably going to actually make things better.
I think so.
Because then,
I think so.
Who knows what you can do with your own data as far as what that value actually is? Because like in the past, it was just customer list, right, and people who purchase from you, and that's kind of your asset. But now, if you have first party, that could also be sold off probably if your company was bought, right?
Yeah, like if you have an exit plan and you want to, you sell your company or whatever, that's a business asset that you spent a lot of money and time growing. And as someone who maybe has an exit plan or whatever, you could probably write into the contract, here's what you are allowed to do with this data, and here's what you're not allowed to do with this data if we agree to these terms. And again, for me, I have zero desire for any of the data that I collect on my website to be sold to a data broker. It doesn't. It's not a thing that benefits me at all, right?
Well, and I think too with first-party data, it's a great way to package the value. I think this could be just an absolute. I could be completely wrong, but my guess would be in the future that could increase the value of a company. Is not only your customer list, but what is your data? What is all the data you have? Because if you can hand that off to someone that is buying your company, that's, to me, that's one of the most valuable things. Is what are all these data sets that you have that we could use to keep growing the business and give us a head start?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I feel like, and I know I've said this before, in the future, my prediction, and I'm confident I'm 100% right on this, is that businesses are going to have to own their platform, meaning they're going to have ownership over the servers that their website runs on. They're going to have ownership over their marketing tools. They're going to have ownership over how they're gathering visitor data. And that means there's going to be a higher technical barrier to getting to that, because now you have to know how servers work and some of these things. But what that means is, because of that ownership, you're going to get cleaner data. You're going to get access to data that in maybe a year from now, you can ask a question, hey, what about, remember that one campaign that we ran? Or, hey, is there anything similar between the people that followed this step into this purchase funnel? You can go back and answer those questions. Whereas right now, that's really hard to do. So owning that entire stack is going to be more and more and more important. And I think the negatives is you're going to start having places where they handle a lot of that stuff for you. It's going to be harder and harder and harder for them to scale. And I'm thinking of places like ClickFunnels, right? These funnel builders, or Kajabi that builds funnels, or I don't know, Squarespace, or maybe even Wix or whatever. Shopify maybe kind of fits into that category, but Shopify does some unique stuff, and I feel like they stay on top of things pretty fast. And I would be pretty confident that they would basically make it easy for you to spin up your own server that you have ownership over, but then your Shopify fee is basically a maintenance fee, right? But it would be kind of like your own ownership or something like that. I feel like they would have a way to do that. But these other, like ClickFunnels, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but their privacy agreement, they share data all over the place.
Like, well, I would assume so.
They share it all over the place, and I'm going to guess most of those. Any of those funnel builders probably do the same thing. And I think that's going to be a hindrance in the future more than it is going to be a benefit. So what I think those sites will turn into would be something like, okay, I have a business idea, I've got this plan, and I need something quick and dirty to get started. But then once you hit a certain level, you'll need to move off to a platform that you own.
Well, I think there's going to probably, all that really means is, business is a constant pivot, right? And what that means is there's going to be more offerings, new services provided of people, helping you build this out and giving it to you. So I think, to me, it looks bright as far as what's going to happen, because if you think about it, first party data you always want, because you don't want to put your hands your business in the hands of someone else, because you can't control that, right? So the first party stuff, I think, is going to totally be beneficial. I think it's going to be a big asset to everyone who starts to build it. If you build early, you'll probably have an advantage, just like anything.
Yep.
And I think it's really important to also understand, like, at the moment, if someone wants to execute this and they know nothing about code or whatever, should they just go to Upwork, or what do they do to set this up? Or does Google have something already set up where a person maybe that similar to like myself that knows some but not all?
Yeah.
Are there instructions to follow,
Yeah.
or is it just hire it out? Like, just find someone, just say, hey, just build this.
Both. First, I always think it's worthwhile to have an understanding, even if you're not a technical server administrator, DevOps kind of person, to have a good understanding about just the project and how it works in general. Maybe you're not the one writing the code or whatever. So that's the first thing. Google has some documentation on it.
Okay.
And it's literally like 2 pages of documentation. I think you could read it in a few minutes. Second, you can definitely look at hiring it out to someone on Upwork. It's a relatively new thing.
I was just going to ask you, how do you know if someone actually knows how to do this?
Well, you gotta interview them and ask them. And I mean, look, I've been doing this kind of stuff for a long time, but I haven't actually ever set up server side. But I read through all of their instructions, and I understand every bit of the process, and I've done the exact same process just with something else, right? So I'm 100% confident that I could launch this, get it set up and everything. Like, I've done all of the puzzle pieces. I just haven't done it with this software package. So that's one way to do it. The third thing is a lot of people don't know this, but companies like Google and Amazon, they have an entirely different side of their business.
Okay.
So with Amazon, it's called Amazon Web Services.
Yes.
And what it is it's for hosting servers, web servers, databases, all of these things, and they own the physical infrastructure, but you own the server, which is basically think of it like a virtual machine server running on their hardware, but it's you have to maintain it and everything. Google has the exact same thing, and it's called GCP, Google Cloud Platform, and it's for web servers, right? And you can set up web servers starting. They even have a free tier.
Okay.
So as long as you don't hit a certain like traffic threshold or bandwidth threshold, you don't have to pay anything for your first server, and I think you can only use one of those at a time or whatever. And so reading through the documentation on Google Cloud Platform, they said that 99.9% of use cases, the free tier for server side Google Tag Manager is fine.
It's fine.
So you don't even have like an extra cost associated with this. Now, Google Cloud Platform, they may even have like a one-click provisioning service as part of it for Google Tag Manager. And what that means is you basically hop in there and say, okay, I want a server on your free tier, I want a virtual server, and I want you to install all the software I need to run Google Tag Manager server side. Go. And then it has a bunch of scripts behind the scenes and I'm going to get nerdy here, behind the scenes that's going to install Ubuntu, probably 2022 Server Edition. It's going to put the web server software on there, which is probably a software called Nginx. They're gonna put your file management software on there, and then they're gonna put open up the firewall ports so that you have the secure traffic that can come into that. And then they will, after all of that provisioning is done, they will then install the Google Tag Manager software, and they'll say, you're done. What domain do you want this to point to? And then you point it to that domain, and then they'll give you a login.
Got it.
But that is your server, even though it's on their whatever on their physical hardware cloud. That is your server to own and maintain, and that's your database of data, and that's your domain name, and that's yours.
Got it. And how do you? So you've used a word that I think is important too. What type of maintenance does it require from a technical side? Do you need to be doing something to make sure that it's up to date, that's working the way it's supposed to?
So So typically, when you own your own server in a virtualized environment like this, you are responsible for server updates in the server operating system, and then code updates and things along those lines. Whenever I spin up a server like this, I usually use a service called DigitalOcean. They're one of my favorites. That they host the server, and I can spin up a server as needed. But then I also use an external service that I pay $15 a month for that will install security updates. It will notify me of things going on behind the scenes or whatever. And that's for a specific kind of technology stack.
Okay.
That service wouldn't work necessarily for Google Cloud Platform.
Got it.
That being said, Google Cloud Platform does have some services that can help auto install updates and things along those lines.
And you would pay for that? You would say like you have to like add like I want this and that, or
maybe.
Okay.
It kind of depends. I wouldn't be surprised if for their free tier, for this service, for this offering, if Google has some sort of a way to just say, yes, I want you to do automatic server updates and not charge you for it. Because frankly, it's in their best interest to do so. Like, they want people to continue to use Google Tag Manager. They want people to continue to use their platform and their service and everything. And so they're incentivized to make it as easy as possible for that to happen. But it's definitely going to be more technical than just using the regular Google Tag Manager.
Than what people are used to, right?
Yeah. But I think it's approachable for anybody that has the ability to learn new things and learn a new skill. I think it's probably going to be quite approachable for someone like that.
Well, it sounds like, too, the next wave, you know how social media marketing was a big wave early on, and it really picked up. I think the next wave is going to be the actual technical side of implementing, because of all these changes. Yeah. And I think there's some big opportunities for guys like you that already have corporate experience and entrepreneurial experience with how to code all this and how to make it safe and not break and all that. I think there's going to be a big shift in needing that, right? Because it sounds like most of the platforms are. In fact, before we started recording, I asked you a question about well, how do you even figure out, like, TikTok, their retargeting was asking for, and I can't even remember, something about...
It was like an advertiser ID.
Something like an advertiser ID, and I said, well, how does someone even figure that out? Yeah. You know what I mean? And so I think those are the types of questions that are going to happen, and you're going to start seeing maybe a higher... in fact, you're working with a couple of companies that hired you for... these types of things, right? Where they're actually hiring outside consultants to make sure that they can come in and do a lot of this IT stuff because they don't know how.
Yeah, well, exactly. And I think if you're even a small, media buyer or agency or something like that, it'd be worth trying to build a relationship with someone that's more technical, because these two sides of things, the technical side of things, the DevOps, the software engineering side, and the marketing, the media buying side, those two things are going to become more and more and more intertwined as we go down the road. And so having either a working relationship with someone who's doing that as freelance or consulting, or bringing someone that's good in-house to help with that is going to be very important.
It's funny. You'll probably remember this. So remember there was like I don't know, maybe a 2-year stint where growth hacking was big. Do you remember that? It was it's like a term that was just being thrown around everywhere. And I remember there was an integration of where like the Ubers and the Airbnbs, they were pairing up with software engineers and marketers to like make the ultimate marketing machines. Right. And then for some reason it felt like that went away. And I'm not 100% sure, maybe but it just felt like you just stopped hearing about it. Like growth hacking just kind of went away. But it sounds like it's going to move back to that, but on a more, I guess, long-term basis, meaning growth hacking is probably not sustainable as far as like there's no real hacks that you can do for the long term. No. But the philosophy, I think, is a good one, which is pair up marketing and salespeople with, engineers. Yeah. And then have the engineers help design, like, say, we need this, and the engineer knows how to actually build it correctly. Yeah. I think that's going to be a big 1-2 punch in a lot of companies moving forward.
Absolutely. And I mean, as far as growth hacking going away, a lot of the things they were doing back then were very short-sighted. I mean, you had Uber, Airbnb, all these. They really just wanted to get their business to a point where they could either exit or go public. And they did that. And now they've got to sit down for the long haul, and they've both struggled in big ways in that because they did a bunch of shortcuts to get to that exit. But, I mean, back on topic, it is going to be a big 1-2 punch to pair that together. And it's not a new strategy. I mean, I can't remember where I first heard this, but the intersection of creativity and logic and technical capabilities is where a lot of magic really happens. And if we look in completely different industries, what was it? Pixar was one of the first where they had the story writers and the artboard creators, and they forced them to be in the same room as the 3D modelers and the technical people, and that's why they kept creating just this insane stuff, because the intersection of a lot of those ideas was where the innovation actually started happening. And it's going to be the same with media buying, marketing, and everything. And this, and frankly, this is one of the reasons we kind of started this podcast. Was for this exact same thing, because this is where a lot of the magic happens. I, as a software guy, I mean, I've done my fair share of marketing, but as a software engineering guy and DevOps guy, there's a lot of times I don't think about certain aspects. And then you will say, hey, Blake, have you ever thought about this? And it gets me thinking about how I could get results or better results from a technical standpoint, but I would never have thought of that had you not pointed it out. And then the same back
Vice
to you,
versa.
right? When I start talking about technical things, you start thinking about, well, wait a minute. If we need to do this and this, maybe if I structure my campaigns like this, we will then give the machine learning AI the correct triggers it needs to do whatever. And then you go test it and confirm or disprove that, right?
Here's something. This is something that I think yours and I's situation, I think, is unique, where we automatically kind of, I think, respect each other's opinion on our kind of expertise, right? But I say this with a giant but, because I think these two roles probably industry-wide butt heads in a way, right? Similar to like how I know, like in a traditional like salespeople and operators, or salespeople and accountants and stuff like that, they have two different views of the other profession. And normally it's not a positive one, right? It's like, well, these salespeople, they're a bunch of idiots. They say anything just to get the sale, and then the operations has to clean it up. And then vice versa. The operations, they don't know how to sell, right? And so what are some ways that, and before I even go into that, would you agree?
Oh,
like,
totally. Yeah.
It's probably like technical and sales and vice versa.
There's always headbutting between, like, I'll lump all IT together, and then like creatives, marketing, or whatever. I've seen that. I've experienced that when I've been working corporate. Luckily, I've worked at a lot of places where there was very quickly built some mutual respect there. And I think that there needs to be some understanding. You're both experts in your own area, and instead of saying, that's a dumb idea, why would changing the button color, why should I spend 20 minutes hopping in there, changing the button color, putting a commit in there, and then pushing that out to the website? That's not going to make any difference. But you're over here, well, I want to measure if that makes a difference. Well, and kind of the funny thing is, because I know just how, I come a lot from the sales side. I know how salespeople who do not understand technical, how almost ignorant we can sound when you say, hey, can't you just do this? Like, it should just take 5 minutes. Can you just code this really fast, make me the next Facebook, and then we can test it. And if it don't work, just make Instagram next, right? It's like there's these huge asks for things that you don't understand, right? And you assume like, oh, they just don't want to do it. Or vice versa. Well, why can't you give me a more structured idea of what you're doing? I've made this mistake so many times, it's not even funny, of not providing enough detail to even allow an engineer, an engineer-minded individual, the tools necessary to build something, right? Because they can't just, they're not just going to build it, so they don't know what the idea is. Right.
You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you can't just say, hey, build me something that gets me more sales. That could be who knows what.
I know, right?
And the engineer themselves, I believe, understands that's going to take a lot of time.
Yeah.
And so they want to, like, for sure know what the plan is because they know it's going to take time to build it. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And part of the reason is because when you're in the middle of engineering something, there's a bunch of tiny little, and no one talks about this, so I'm actually kind of glad we're talking about it.
Yeah.
There's a bunch of tiny little micro decisions you have to make about how you structure something because that's going to have long-term impacts in 6 months or whatever. And so not having enough context means, okay, I can build something that looks like that, but then in 6 months, I didn't quite fully understand what the larger vision was, so I made a couple of micro decisions early on that now are making it way harder to do X, Y, and Z that was part of the plan all the time. And so now we've come at an impasse, and it's become hard to maintain, and blah blah blah. But it does exist the other way as well, because a lot of engineers will say. You could say something like, all right, we need a sign-up form. All right, I'll make a sign-up form. And it's ugly and hard to use. And the labels are off to the side instead of over top. So on mobile, it doesn't quite look right. But you're like, but it works. And that's where engineers need to say, but hold on. We're creating this to help like the customer, the visitor, whatever, which ultimately helps both of us. And so we need to lean on some expertise there. To make sure that what's being built is not only just functional, but it's easy to use
for the
and
customer.
It's intuitive for the customer and all of those things. And so that's where the mutual respect needs to come together.
Well, and it's funny. I've worked with many people in the kind of the engineering, more development type individual that builds this stuff that actually works. And what I've learned is I've learned to become more, empathetic or whatnot to what I'm saying and how it's being interpreted. Right. Because one thing I know, whenever you're a professional in your field, I think there's a level of kind of, what's the word, like territorialism or whatever. Hey, listen. Like this is my space here. You know what I mean? Like I know what I'm doing, right?
Yeah.
Because you do.
Yeah.
And so there's a level of that. So sometimes when there are suggestions being made, it could feel like it's an attack.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's actually not. And so one thing I try to stay very conscious of is when I'm speaking to engineer people, engineer-minded, and I'm kind of bucketing everyone in that technical space and that, but to make sure that I'm communicating in no way am I criticizing what you're doing. I'm speaking out loud so you have enough information to digest it and build it. And I'm thinking of, there's an individual I'm thinking of right now where our first conversation was very rough. And it's because I didn't think thoroughly enough. Because I assumed he knew what I meant by what I was saying. Like he knew like my intent was not that. I didn't actually voice that first. And this is a brand new relationship. So I made the critical mistake of assuming I have credibility automatically with someone who has no idea who I am.
Right. Well, and let's and let's be clear on both sides of this fence here. There are jerks. There are idiots, right? And there are people that give both sides a bad name, and so that does happen. But I think as long as both sides are willing to even just spend 30 minutes reading up on what goes into media buying and what goes into attribution as an engineer, will put you in such a better place. And for media buyers or whatever, spending 30 minutes about what an engineer has to do to whatever can help. And
a day in the life of, what do they say when they say walk in someone else's shoes?
Oh, yeah.
It's very easy to tell people what to do when you don't have to do it or have never experienced it.
Yeah.
But in every profession and role, there are pressures. And there's different types of pressures and demands that come from these roles. And if you allow yourself to work in these roles for a day or two, you may only last a few hours. That's because you'll learn really quickly. Oh, this is not as easy as this person is making it look.
Yeah.
Because they're a professional in that space,
they spent
right?
a long time. I mean, I've been doing the tech side of things for 20 years now. I mean,
so
long time.
It's going to look easy. Like someone will watch you do something and go, "Oh, that's got to be." It took them 5 minutes, but it took you 20 years to make it 5 minutes.
Right. And you've been doing sales and marketing for probably about the same amount of time, right? Like a long time.
Yeah, a very long time.
Yeah. And so. Yeah, it's worth sharing that mutual respect, but I mean we're a little bit long on this, so why don't we wrap it up?
Respect your engineers.
Yeah, respect your media buyers. They're but I would say just to circle back to the initial conversation where we're talking about server side Google Tag Manager.
Yep.
I'm confident we're going to see more and more and more of this stuff where your platform is going to need you're going to need to have some ownership over that server, so it's first-party data. I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing this with analytics. In fact, we already are seeing this with analytics. There's some projects out there where you have to maintain your own server, but you get a lot better tracking because you own it. It's first-party data. We're going to start seeing. We might start seeing this with email marketing.
Okay.
That will be a really interesting one for me. So I'm going to be keeping my eye on that, but I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing it with that. And we might start seeing it with all sorts of other things, website hosting, and I mean we already see that in website hosting. But we'll see more and more and more of it. So
got it.
Yeah.
Well, I think this episode we've kind of covered the importance of new technology and essentially what to do and who to look for.
Yeah.
When you need these, because it's important. This is only going to get more and more critical for businesses as the years go on, not less.
Yep, absolutely.
And so it'll be a good idea now to start thinking about what's your technology plan moving forward with all of this data, because you just want to be prepared. You don't want to be the business that is not thinking about this and your competitors are, and then they speed right past you because you didn't take the time to learn how the market's actually moving.
Yeah, I think there's no harm in just setting up one of these servers yourself and going through their process, because they're a virtual server, you can create it, you can destroy it, you can create it again, you can destroy it again. It's not like they're basically kind of disposable. So there's no harm in going to Google's documentation page and just saying, all right, let's just go through these steps. We'll sign up, we'll sign in, and then I'll install it on a website and see if we get data. If it doesn't, troubleshoot it or try to figure it out.
Again.
There's no harm in that. There's only good that can come out of going through that process, even if you're not a super technical person. Because number one, you'll have a good understanding about what the process takes. Number two, you'll have a good understanding when you're interviewing someone to help you with that, maybe on Upwork or something. You'll be able to know if they're full of shit or not.
You don't want to get taken. You don't want to get taken.
And number three, you might realize, oh, this is something I can handle myself, and now it's a new service I can offer for my clients. And because it worked well for me, I can spin it up in 20, 30 minutes, but it's a huge value offer for my clients, even though I'm just maybe a media buyer and I'm not a tech person. So,
well, I think if you need help with this, where do we go?
You just go to blakebuse.com. You can reach out to me on there, and that'd be a good way. They can reach out to you as well.
Yeah, you can go to gregmarshall.co. You can book a strategy session call, but when it comes to the technical side, all I'm going to do is forward you over the link. So.
And you can join SM3, which is a group on social media marketing, where we cover topics from beginners to experts. And everything in between. So,
well, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Make sure to subscribe to our channel anywhere you see it. And,
all right, we'll catch you guys later. Bye.